Hello, this is Lincoln, aka High Contrast. I am a drum and bass producer, remixer, and DJ from South Wales, who has been asked by the University of South Wales to do some kind of masterclass. That might be overstating it, but I can certainly talk about my creative process and just how I make music in general. I've been doing it for over 20 years now, scarily. And I started out as a teenager completely clueless about music production. Really didn't know a thing. So, and basically kind of self taught because I didn't know anyone, who was making drum and bass. And then this was before YouTube tutorials or even university courses about this kind of thing. So there's hope for anyone. I think if I've managed to do it, I think that the main thing is having a passion for whatever path you're trying to follow. I think that is really important in any creative field. Is your heart has got to be in it. This has got to be the thing that you really believe in, and I think that will carry you a long way. So when I started out, I had a very basic demo of Cubase that came free with a magazine, and it said, with this software, you too could even make jungle music. And I didn't even know much about jungle at that time, but I'd heard a little bit, and things on TV, interviews with Goldie, and I was intrigued by it. And so that was a light bulb kind of moment where I was like, oh wow, with this piece of software, I could actually make music just in my computer. And it was a very basic demo. I think there was only 2 channels of audio, and I didn't have any MIDI devices. You could have MIDI, but that was beyond my capability at that time. And so I was literally just downloading low quality drum samples from the internet, which we had just gotten at this point, in kind of like 96, 97. And then got my mum's Motown CD collection, and I was looking for sounds on that because I knew a little bit about hip hop, and I knew that people like DJ Premier, producer who I love, I knew he sampled soul and funk and things. So I thought, oh, maybe if I take some sounds from these Motown CDs, I'll be able to make something like that. And my first attempts were a complete mess. I really didn't know what I was doing. But it is kind of funny to me that, over 20 years later, I'm still doing the same kind of thing, which is looking for soul samples and putting them over, jungle beats. Some things never change. But I'm hopefully a bit more savvy in what I'm doing, and it sounds better than those early experiments. But I must have made, over 100. I'm not going to say tracks because they weren't finished tracks, but I had 100 or more sketches, musical ideas that I made in Cubase over a number of years. Before I really got anywhere, and I think that is an important part of the process, that you don't get hung up on, the first track you try to make or the first 10 tracks you try to make. I think a lot of beginners keep going back to things thinking that if they keep tweaking it, it will eventually turn into a masterpiece. And the reality is the first track you make probably isn't going to be very good, and it's more important to keep a momentum and move on from that kind of thing, and just keep the ideas flowing, and each time you try and make a track, I think you learn something and you'll get better at it. So it's more important, I think, in the early days to have volume of output rather than worry too much about the quality. Although, of course, you should be trying to make things that you love the sound of, but you're probably going to be frustrated a lot of the time when you're starting out, before you really kind of figure out what you're doing and what your style is. And I mean, that's another important thing, that when I started out, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really have a style. I was just trying to emulate records that I loved, and I think that is a valid and important thing to do, you know. So I loved Goldie and Digital and J Magic, producers like that at the time, and I still do. But in trying to make copies of their tracks, I think you learn a lot. You learn a bit, hopefully, about their process, but also you kind of gravitate to what really grabs you about their sound, you know. And so, like with Goldie, it was like maybe the strings was something I really connected with, maybe more than the drums, you know. And then with Digital, it was like his sub bass was what really drew me in. And then with J Magic, it was the atmosphere. And I think if you take bits from a variety of artists and then kind of put them together, you know, you might end up with an original thing that is your sound, your style, you know. And that certainly happened eventually with me. But the eureka moment was when I was just such a drum and bass head. It was all I was listening to, that I'd kind of shut out every other type of music. You know, I just wasn't interested. You know, I was that person who was annoying people at parties by just playing drum and bass all night. And if you ever got in a car with me, I would have a tape of a DJ mix from a rave that I would insist on playing as loud as possible. So I was quite myopic, and I really only kind of broke through and developed my own sound once I opened my mind up. And that really happened when I started working at Catapult Records in Cardiff, the dance music specialist, run by the esteemed Lucy Squire, big up. And in working in the record shop, you know, I was meeting all different kinds of people, and, you know, meeting people who were passionate about music, but different types of music to me. And it was just, I mean, I can't overstate how important that was. It really opened me up to specifically house music, you know, which I hated, and up until I started working there. And then when I started hearing like Chicago and New York house, and then French house, I just fell in love with the sound and was like, well, why don't we have these kind of soulful, jazzy or soul or disco influenced sounds in drum and bass? And then I was like, that's what I need to do. And you know, that was really the moment where I was like, let's take these house sounds and put them into drum and bass and hopefully come up with something new. Because drum and bass at that time was very masculine, very kind of dark and heavy sounding. And, you know, I can like that, but it wasn't my passion. You know, I wanted this kind of uplifting, warmer sound, which I was hearing in house music. And that really kind of became my style and sound. And I mean, it still is to this day, really. The people think of me as a kind of uplifting drum and bass guy. You know, there is a dominant kind of sound that has basically stuck with me since that eureka moment. And I think you only really get to that through trying to make lots of tracks, you know. I think experience is the most important thing, the doing of it rather than the thinking about it, you know. And for me, a lot of making music is trying to tap into your subconscious and not working too consciously, you know. Like, I'm someone who's very kind of, you know, an overthinker normally, and music for me is a way of kind of escaping overthinking things and just being more in the moment and just following your heart rather than your head. Um, and I think that is important because music is really about emotion. It's about you feeling something and making something, and that resulting in other people listening to it and hopefully feeling something. That's what we're all trying to do. Um, so the music production I do can be split into two categories. There's my own original productions, and then there are remixes I do for other people. And for me, the main thing is the original productions, like just making my own music. Like that is my kind of passion in life. That is how I express myself, and thankfully there is an audience out there who are into it, and I built up a following over the years. But I also am really doing it for myself because that is I just enjoy the process of making music, and I think if you enjoy it, that process or whatever creative field you're pursuing, I mean, if as long as you really enjoy what you're doing, that is kind of the main thing. And I think will in most cases lead to other people being able to appreciate your work, but I think you have to love it first, even though you often do end up maybe hating what you make, or just being so sick of it because you've heard it so many times. I think you have to still enjoy the process and kind of thrive on the creative process. When it comes to remixes, in a way, I think of everything I do as a remix because most of my original work is based around sampling, taking musical ideas from other people and recycling them, chopping them up, which I'm not like a traditional songwriter where I sit at a piano and then, develop it into a song. Like I usually begin with samples, and sometimes I'll end up taking the samples out of a track and they've just been a springboard to get an idea going. But for me, I don't even think of myself really as a musician. I think of myself as an editor of sound. And that's what really excites me. When I find an obscure sample from a forgotten old record, and it's something I bought, in Philadelphia, and then I put it with a vocal that I found on an obscure record that I bought in Italy or something, and just putting these things together that the universe would never otherwise conspire to put together, and being the one who does that and kind of making something that wouldn't exist otherwise, like that really that is one of the big things for me about me making music and why I do it. I just love that process and trying to find these disparate sounds, but that they slot together and sound like they were made for each other. I love that kind of cosmic poetry when you get that right. And it's something you can't really chase. I think you're looking for happy accidents. So much of making music, and I think any artistic field is about happy accidents. And you're just trying to set up the pieces where you allow those things to happen as much as possible. So the sampling is really the focus of what I do most of the time. Not always. Sometimes I do try a more traditional approach to songwriting, but because of that sampling, it is as if everything I do is kind of a remix of something else, and I think that naturally led to me getting remix work because my head is just so tuned to the idea of remixing things, of taking other people's ideas and reworking them. And when you get asked to do an official remix by another artist or their label, to me it's just fun because they've taken the hard part out of the equation. If you agree to do it, and you like the track, well then that means that there is a great musical idea there already. So you're you don't have to find that sample. They're giving it to you and saying, please, remix this track, do your thing with it. And so most of the time that is a lot of fun. Usually record labels want things, by yesterday, so you have a very short period of time to make the track, but that can also aid the creative process. I am a procrastinator, and if someone doesn't give me a deadline, I usually, you know, won't finish the thing. Whereas if someone says, I need this finished in 2 weeks, then I can do that, and I think that sense of momentum, creative energy, that's all good stuff to have in the studio. So I've got a project here in Ableton. It doesn't matter what you're using, really. It's the least thing you should, be thinking about. It's your musical ideas that will hopefully win the day. So I used Ableton on the latest album I made, which is called Notes from the Underground, and it's a jungle album. So I've got a track from the album open here in Ableton, and it's a track called Dolphin. Now, usually I spend a lot of time coming up with names for my tracks because I think words are powerful, and I love kind of poetry, and humans are a linguistic species, so it's probably our defining characteristic. So I do think words are important. But then I mean, just as it happens with this track that I thought I'd show you, it's called Dolphin, which the track began because I found a sample that sounded like a dolphin noise. And so I just called the sketch Dolphin, and I was just thinking in the back of my head, oh, I'll call it, so I'll come up with something more interesting. And as time went on, the guys at the record label, my management, they kept referring to the track as Dolphin. And when I did try and change the name, they were like, no, we love the name Dolphin, let's stick with that. So here we are with Dolphin. As I said, it began with a dolphin sample, which I'll play for you now. So that's got a ton of reverb on it at the moment. So that's a sound I found, and it just had a kind of rhythm to it. And, I kind of played it on the keyboard to find, a good pitch. And it just seemed to fit with a jungle beat, and yeah, it just became the linchpin of the whole track. So I started to think, what could go with that sound, and I was thinking strings. Just rewind a little bit, like there's a history in jungle music of dolphin noises. It was like a thing in the early 90s. I think it might have been Photech who made a tune called the Dolphin track on Good Looking Records. And yeah, it was just a meme of some kind at the time. That I just always liked the bizarrety of having these aquatic noises in a jungle track. I mean, you don't even find dolphins in the jungle, do you? They're in the sea, so I don't know what the connection is, but it's just always appealed to me. And because this was a jungle album I was making, it just felt fitting to have this reference to that. So then I was looking for strings, and again, I could have played something in using a synth, but I was really trying to lean into the sampling aspect with this album, because jungle is so built around sampling, whereas modern drum and bass isn't. It's much more kind of synth led, making sounds in synth, not using found sounds so much. So there's a sample I found of strings. Now this was just from a sample CD of, I think, trance, which again, is not a genre you would think of to sample in jungle or drum and bass, but um, it just appeals to me to do something like that, because I think people wouldn't think of that, or they don't like the idea of taking something from trance and putting it into jungle, but it just appeals to me. So here's the original sample. So I felt like there were some really good chords in that sample, and I like the feel of it, but obviously trance is like, I don't know, 130 or 140 BPM, and drum and bass is much faster. The modern drum and bass is like 174 BPM. Jungle is anywhere above 160. So that wouldn't, sit easily in a track that I wanted to make, but you could speed it up, you could time stretch it, there's various ways of doing it. You could cut it up. But what I came up with was, there's a free program called Pull Stretch, which is just this kind of random extreme time stretch program that you can find online, and it's used by a lot of people, and it's used sometimes by people to make those things for YouTube where you have like a song that has been like a famous pop song that has been slowed down supposedly 1,000% or something, and it's like a Justin Bieber track. You time stretch it a ridiculous amount and it ends up sounding like an ambient soundscape. Now I took that kind of short trance sample and turned it into something which is like 2.5 minutes, so it's this extreme spectral time stretching, and it makes it sound very ethereal and ghostly, and it becomes this very slow motion ambient lushness. So I love the sound of that immediately. It's just very atmospheric, and I think already it takes you quite a long way from the original sample. But it was too slow and long to really do anything with in the high speed genre of drum and bass and jungle. So what I did was take that long stretched out version and put it into a sampler, and I use this Serato sample, which is pretty cheap, but I mean you could use Ableton's built-in free sampler, or any sampler really, but I put it in here because I really like the way you can kind of move the markers around, and also it's got this button that says find samples, and I think I literally just kind of hit that and it will go through and randomly try and pick up main points in the sample, and I'll do that because sometimes I like just letting the computer do something for you randomly, and then playing the notes and seeing if anything jumps out, so you can see it's kind of spread the sample across the keys now, so it's just each note I'm hitting on the keyboard is triggering section. So I've just got a little MIDI keyboard here, so it's like I'm holding an 80s ghetto blaster. You can see that the sample has been spread across the keys at kind of random points. But I basically then just started going through and picking out notes that jumped out at me. And eventually I found this this sequence that just immediately felt right. And that just seemed to slot in with the dolphin noise. So once I had the original string sample and the dolphin noise, I started adding some other strings, which have a pitch bend on them, which is kind of a reference to Goldie, who's still one of the big influences on me. And there's a few other textural sounds that you maybe don't notice, but it's just adding to the atmosphere of the piece. There's also some dialogue samples. I found that I love having bits of dialogue from movies thrown into tunes, and it's something you do a lot in jungle. And my love of films, it just makes sense.
This is getting to be an obsession.
So that line saying this is getting to be an obsession, I mean, that for me was talking about jungle in general, also dolphin noises, because there's a few on the album. It's a line from Total Recall, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, but to avoid any copyright issues, I went on Fiverr.com, Fiverr, and you can find all kinds of people on there to do, whether it's make a logo for you or play the tuba or whatever, and there's a lot of actors and voiceover artists on there, and I tried to find someone who could do the voice from the actress. I think it was Sharon Stone in Total Recall. So I did that quite a bit on the album, like finding actors to recreate bits of dialogue for me to sample, and then I tried to process it so it sounded like it was from a film and put through a sampler and things like that. So then I felt, because this was feeling like an old school track, you often would have a piano in an old school tune, and I'm kind of known for piano led tracks as well, so I thought a piano would be fitting. So I found a very old school, cheap sounding piano, not realistic, but I just like that plastic rave piano sound, and came up with this melody. Just put some delay, reverb, and distortion on it, and away we go. I then thought a vocal, could be a good fit, and I tried a lot of different vocals, and couldn't find something that really fit until I found this one line that said, "Is it real?" And I like the kind of unreal nature of making electronic music, and jungle specifically, just the collage of sounds. You're making something impossible, and it's just like this bizarre world where you have dolphins and bits of Total Recall, and then bits of a trance track and bits of whatever all mashed together, and to me it's like this very dream-like unreal world. So when I found this vocal that said, "Is it real?" That felt like it was a good fit. So I found this one vocal, and I liked the line, but it was it needed to be sped up. So I think I've got the original sound here. Oh, is it real? So it's from like I think a 70s soul track, and then I sped it up. Is it real? to be in key with the track I'm making, but also I love pitching things up and down. So then I also, pitched it the other way.
Is it real? Oh, is it real?
I like doing that kind of, again, impossible manipulation. Something that a singer couldn't do. It's something you can only do with music technology. So then I turn probably to the drums and the bass element. Now, a lot of the time, people begin making tracks with the drums, and when a genre is called drum and bass, although I prefer to call it jungle, it makes sense, you think, to begin with the drums. But to me, the emotion's got to come first, and the emotion comes from whatever the melodic content is of the track. I love drums, but I think if you let the drums dictate where the track goes, you're maybe not coming from the most soulful of places. It depends what kind of music you want to make. But for me, the emotion, the melody, the soul of it, that is really what it's all about. And so I always try and find drums that complement the musical ideas, rather than try and find some musical idea that fits in with the drums you have. So within the drum group, I've got another folder called the All Drums group, and there must be, I don't know, 15 layers or so of main drum sounds, and then some more like edits and things. And it can be kind of messy, and I probably overcomplicate it. But drums are just one of those things that are just very personal to each individual producer. And how you make your drums is a big part of what your overall sound is, because drums dominate dance music. I'll play them on their own. So that's like the kind of main drum sound, and then there's other layers of breaks going on underneath. But the main idea is that there is your main drum hits, a main kick and main snare and main hi-hats, and that's kind of at the front of the mix. And underneath that, you have various layers of drum breaks, sampled beats, things you cut up. So the main kick, the main snare, and then underneath that you have all these many layers of sampled drum beats. This was an interesting one because it was a well-known kind of jungle break that I took all the bottom end out of and put loads of reverb on, and it felt a bit like there's just a little bit of if I turn the reverb off, you can hear that kind of high-pitched squeal on it, which is a vocal element that has been sped up, I think, and so it sounded like almost like a jungle noise, like an animal in the jungle, and putting reverb on it just kind of made it quite atmospheric. And just having that layer there in the background, it just, again, it seemed to slot in with the dolphin noise and the ambient strings. They all just seem to work together. But yeah, there's just these tons of drums, a mess of drums, but somehow they hopefully coalesce into one cohesive drum sound. And then if we're looking at the bass, I mean, obviously in drum and bass music, the bass is going to be another big part. But again, most of the time I leave the bass till quite late in the process. see, I've got a sub bass sample that I put into a sampler and then played the notes on the keyboard. I distorted it, clipped it to give it some high end, because without the distortion, hang on if I can figure that out. So that is the dry sub bass sound. Now I put a bit of distortion on it to give it some presence and loudness, but I felt it wasn't cutting through the mix, and so I sent the signal to a distortion channel. I used this plugin called Faturator, and you can hear there it's turned it into this really distorted, crispy sound. But just having that there quiet in the mix allowed for it to come through, it's something you only are really noticing when you listen to it in isolation, but I just felt it needed to be there when the track was running, just as a subtle thing to help the bass connect with your ears. Because although I'm making this track, even though at this point, without gigs happening, this has never been played in a club, but hopefully one day it would. And so I have that mindset of very kind of clubby music. The way I mix tracks is very club orientated. So I was designing it so that the sub bass would hit you. But then I also know that most people are probably listening to this on earbuds or on their phone or on a laptop, where they're not going to feel the sub bass. And so you have to kind of give them something where their ear can pick up on to follow what the bass is doing, and just having that kind of distorted layer in the background of the sub bass can help that happen. I have a spectrum analyzer on there called Voxengo Span, and this is a free plugin a lot of people use in dance music. So we can see here that the sub bass is hitting at about the same level as the highs of the drums, which is what I go for in a mix. There's also this dip in the low mids, which I think is important so it doesn't sound muddy, but it's it looks pretty even to me, but I try not to let things like that dictate too much of the creative process. I mainly check the spectrum analyzer to see if there's anything glaringly obvious that needs to be fixed, but most of the time I try not to let it dictate what I'm doing, because that's being too scientific, and I think it's more important to follow what feels good. Something you can notice there is call and response, really, which is a very old musical idea, but it feels like the bass and the piano are in interplay with each other. They, if I solo them, it's like you're getting the low sub bass asking the question, and then the high piano answering it. And then in the second half of the phrase, it kind of goes the other way around, where you have the piano, then the bass. But I think that kind of call and response approach to writing melodies is something I often do, without really thinking about it. It's just kind of ingrained in me. I like to have it feel as if everything in the track is in conversation with each other, that they all kind of gel together, these disparate elements into something, that is greater than the sum of its parts, hopefully. So that's basically how I make a track. It's a little insight into my creative process. What works for me may not work for you, but hopefully something I've said has resonated in some way and will help in your own productions.